be wondering of what is this image. This is an image of the beginning, the place it all began, the Garden of Eden, ground zero. Well, not exactly, but at least it is for the branch of my family that I studied. This is an image of Volkovysk, Belarus, the city where my great-grandfather, Jack Seitz, and his family lived before they immigrated to the United States. This is Volkovysk today, but it did not look like this back then. In 1929, the year Jack came to the US, it looked much more like this. Now, you may be wondering why anyone would want to leave this paradise and come to America, but I can assure you, my family had their reasons. My family came to America to, pardon the cliche, find a better life. Jack's father had actually moved to America some years before the rest of his family, so that he could make enough money to allow his family to be secure as soon as they arrived. Jack arrived with his mother in 1929, when Jack was 14 years old. Jack and his family settled in the Bronx in New York City. Though they were in a much better position in the Bronx than they were in Belarus, the Seitz family soon discovered that the streets in America were not actually paved with gold. Once in America, my family had to deal with something they never had dealt with before, the battle between Americanization and traditionalism. For Jack, this battle was primarily provoked by economic factors. 1929 may have been the year he arrived in the US, but 1929 was also the year that the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. As a result of the Depression, Jack's relationship with Judaism was constantly in flux. He initially observed the same traditions and practices he had in Europe, which included attending synagogue every Friday night and Saturday morning, keeping kashrut strictly and zealously, and gathering with his entire family for all major Jewish holidays. All this changed when the worst years of the Depression came in the early 1930s. Jack had to work multiple jobs in order to help his family survive, and thus could no longer observe the Sabbath or go to synagogue as often as he had when he first arrived, or as he had in Europe. Furthermore, Jack's level of observance declined due to educational changes. In order to expose himself to better opportunities and avoid the poverty brought on by the Depression, Jack made it his personal goal to perfect his English. From an early age, Jack tried to separate himself from the swarms of Yiddish-speaking Jews with which he grew up. Being rather intuitive and somewhat clairvoyant, Jack figured that it would be to his benefit to avoid being generalized along with other immigrants who seemed to have never truly left the old country. To execute his plan, Jack often stayed after school with his teachers in order to lose his accent. Later in life, he spoke very highly of his teachers, for whereas his fellow first-generation immigrants spoke heavily accented English, he had no accent whatsoever. Unfortunately, Jack's English came at a high price: his Judaism. Whereas most Jewish immigrants grew up immersed in the culture of their ancestors, Jack made an effort to do the opposite and subsequently began to observe Jewish practices less and less. The decline in Jack's level of observance and rise in Jack's level of Americanization continued into adulthood. Fiercely patriotic and vehemently pro-government, Jack served in the United States Army during the Second World War, a feat he was extraordinarily proud of. Unfortunately, Jack met poverty upon his return from service, and he still had to work more than one job to provide for his family. Interestingly, once Jack retired and was more advanced in years, he began to follow traditions that had been foreign to him for a long time. Jack frequented an Orthodox synagogue near his home in Clifton, New Jersey, and Sabbath observance became paramount to his identity. In a way, his life was a microcosm of Herberg's immigration theory, which argues that traditionalism precedes assimilation, which in turn precedes a restoration of traditionalism. Jack experienced many changes in his level of observance throughout his life, and in this way he began a pattern that has been followed by the next several generations of my family. The next generation to continue Jack's pattern of constant religious evolution was my grandmother, Jack's daughter Ellen. Born in the Bronx in 1943, Ellen grew up in a semi-religious household. She did not attend synagogue, as her father constantly had to work on Saturdays, and though her parents kept a kosher home, she recalls being exposed to more unkosher food than her parents had during their respective childhoods. Ellen's family also made it a point to celebrate every Jewish holiday together, which was easy due to the fact that they all lived within 3 blocks of each other in the Bronx. Later, though, when Ellen's family moved to suburban New Jersey in 1956, Ellen's level of observance declined. As it had become much more difficult to find kosher food, her and her family began to eat out at restaurants, something they'd never experienced before, and any influence that the primarily Yiddish-speaking Jewish community in the Bronx had on Ellen quickly faded. By the age of 13, Ellen knew no Yiddish and, like her father, attended public school with no Jewish education. This broken connection with the past had an immense impact on Ellen's later level of Jewish observance. Though they still kept a kosher home, Ellen and her future husband, Leon Bauman, ate unkosher food outside of their house. Additionally, Ellen only took her family to synagogue on the high holidays, even when they would have been able to attend on Saturdays. Ellen was a special education school teacher and had off on Saturdays. Ellen's relationship with Judaism was extremely reflective of her upbringing, and the pattern of utilizing independent self-exploration to find the perfect balance between traditionalism and Americanization was continued with her son. Ellen's son, David Bauman, was born in Parsippany, New Jersey in 1969. David grew up much like his non-Jewish peers at public school, and was extremely comfortable with his identity as a full American. Growing up, David only minimally observed Judaism, and did not really feel connected to the religion. That all changed when he began to spend Saturdays with his grandparents, Jack and Edna Seitz, when he was 7 years old. Jack had an enormous influence on David, and he would take him to the mall to buy clothing, sneakers, and haircuts. Most importantly, Jack influenced David's Jewish values. After staying at his house in Clifton every Friday night, Jack would walk with David to the local Orthodox synagogue on Saturday mornings. With Jack, David was exposed to elements of his religion with which he had never been familiar, and he was able to forge a new bond with Jewish practices and traditions. For the next several years, their weekly ritual continued, and David gradually became more and more interested in the ways of Judaism. This had just culminated in 1981, when a group of David's cousins from Israel came to stay with his family in Parsippany for 6 months. Strictly Orthodox and fully observant, David's cousins introduced him to practices that even Jack did not follow, such as being unrelentingly Shomer Shabbat, praying every day, and keeping strict kashrut. David was inspired by his cousins, and he made a choice that surprised many. Instead of continuing his education in public school, David wished to attend a yeshiva in order to learn more about his roots. David's parents were in full support. Though they still remained at their current level of observance, they were delighted to see that their son wanted to return to the religion that their parents had been forced to partially forsake. Ellen and Leon took David on tours of several yeshivas around Parsippany, and they finally settled on the Hebrew Youth Academy in Caldwell, New Jersey. There, David learned how to daven, rap tefillin, read Torah, and speak Hebrew. David attended yeshiva from 5th to 7th grade, when he decided that though he enjoyed studying Judaism, that path he was on would not be right for him in the long run. He had already lost touch with his public school friends, and an incident at a USY event in which he felt out of place for wearing tzitzit made him want to leave the yeshiva. Once again, his family was in full support, and he quickly transitioned back to public school, albeit with a newfound love and appreciation for Judaism. This connection manifested during David's senior year in high school, when he elected to attend the Alexander Muss High School in Israel program with some of his Jewish friends. There, David began to understand the level of Jewish observance with which he felt the most comfortable. When he moved to Bethesda, Maryland in 1994 to start a family with his wife, Elisa Bauman, a non-observant Jew and granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, he kept kosher at home, but ate unkosher food out, did not keep Shabbat but occasionally went to synagogue, and became active on the board of his conservative synagogue, B'nai Israel. David, an agent for NBA basketball players, always tried his best to incorporate Jewish family values into his relationship with his clients. David's practices also revolved around support for Israel. In these ways, David's path to his current level of practice fits in with those of his mother and grandfather, as he has continued the pattern of personal religious exploration that began in 1929. As for me, my level of observance has gone through a significant number of changes over the past several years. I've gone from wanting to follow every mitzvah to wanting to have nothing to do with Judaism, but I think I've found the right balance. Currently, I follow kashrut at home, a practice my father strongly values, but eat unkosher food out. I do not observe the Sabbath, but I attend synagogue with my parents on major holidays and occasionally on regular days. I study Hebrew at school, the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, and I actively participate in discussions about religion with my parents at the dinner table. As of now, I plan on raising my family in accordance with my current level of observance. I see the value of maintaining some level of observance for the purpose of keeping the culture of my ancestors intact, and even if it is limited to cooking veal like my great-grandfather used to, I hope to raise children who can connect to the place from where they came.